Welcome back, everyone. I am here with my bestie, the member of Fly on the Wall, the seamstress, the dancer, the costume designer, the I'd say puppeteer sometimes, the
Hmm.
fabulous Jimmy Joyner. So, Jimmy Joyner, how are you?
Ow. I'm very good. I'm good. I'm glad to be here with you. I'm always glad to be with you though.
Me too. I'm glad you're here with me. Uh, and you're in your studio today. What are you working on?
I'm in my studio. Well, I just finished up. I'm doing a little project with Annalie Traylor over at Emory, and we're working with some big pieces of fabric. No surprise.
Mhm.
I got my hands in it, so I was just wrapping up some edges, basically, on the sewing machine. You know, yeah,
Yeah.
laid.
Kind of start from the beginning for you. I'm curious, were you always going to be an artist?
Mm,
Was there ever like any alternative to be anything else, or was it like art or bust? Because I just
mm.
think like where you are now feels like it's such a full-bodied artist experience in your like everyday life. Was it always that way from a kid that it was like, oh, this is an artist?
I think so. I think it was like it feels like this accumulation of things that sort of had and it wasn't even an aha per se, but I think subconsciously at some point, maybe late adolescent or teenager, when I became maybe 12 or 13, all of a sudden I just started moving towards art like with a vengeance almost. I think at a very young age, I was really I was really grateful that my family was a really active family. We played a lot of sports and we did a lot of things and we were out around town a lot. And I think as I started to get older in my childhood and started to reach towards a teenager, I I guess I was just bratty in this way of like self-expression, and I wanted to do something where I could sort of radically express myself, even though that's sort of a complicated idea in rural West Tennessee for somebody like me. But I think that's where queerness like really sort of starts to push forward is how can I um, how do I get to sort of express myself, live a really sort of here we go, complicated word, authentic experience of this life, and art is art. Art does that for us. Art offers us that vehicle.
Yeah, I was wondering how long it would take before we got to queerness, and it was
I,
like maybe 30 seconds. So that as expected.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
but I
yeah.
think what you're talking about is like in search for authentic experience, art plays a huge role in that. Um, and I wonder if it might just be a question I'm thinking about, but is like art
Mm,
part of everyone's queer experience?
mm,
Like, could it do this work? Also curious, what's your sport? If you had to
mm.
play one sport, like what were you good at?
Oh, I
Or what did
really
you like?
I liked soccer the most, I think,
Really?
out of everything. Yeah, I liked soccer a lot. I liked maybe it has something to do with it being a big field and there was actually now I'm just processing this now for the first time as you asked the question, but maybe because the field is large and open and there's sort of like a lot of running involved. A lot of other sports feel really more boxed in or sort of you have to stay in this spot,
Yeah.
and soccer has a lot more. Yeah, maybe that's it.
Well, you're
Or
supposed to
maybe
stay
it's
in a
just
spot
like
in soccer too, but
say that again.
you're supposed to stay in a spot for soccer too, but
Honey, it's just a bigger box.
and
We're
who's gonna
all
stop me?
it's just,
And
yeah.
who gonna check me, boo?
Oh my gosh, I was oh good. Yeah, never mind. I'm not even going to go there. Okay.
Uh, also I was thinking when you're talking about like emerging as this artist, not necessarily consciously, I wonder if not only conscious choices, but conscious things that you've rejected as you're growing up. So knowing
Mm,
what you're not and knowing what you don't want for yourself maybe has
mhm.
gotten you to this point. Does that sound? possible?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm going to take it back to my childhood in sports for a second. I remember the moment that my father played professional baseball for a moment, and he coached. He was a high school teacher, and he coached all sorts of things. And I remember from cognizance when I was young that sports was the thing that we all did, particularly baseball. Baseball was a really big deal. And I remember I was maybe like 7 or 8, maybe at this point, and somehow I started not wanting to go to practice, not wanting to go to games. And then I remember my dad taking me to a game that I had. And I was just really like, I don't want to do this. And he asked me, he was like, you don't, basically, do you not want to do this? You don't have to do this. And I was like, no. And I think that was maybe my first conscious choice I remember of moving away from something that felt like the baseline,
Yeah,
sports, baseball, pun
look at us.
intended, I
Yeah,
guess.
who's on first and all that.
But yeah, I think that was one of the first ones, and that was like a big deal because children and fathers and relationships and wanting to yeah, that's a sticky thing
Um,
there,
well, for a
especially as a
parent to
young
tell
child.
you that you could say no to
Hmm.
something is huge.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that's the way it was, in childhood. As I look back, is and it's not one thing. I think it's a pretty complicated sort of scenario to this day in my mind and body and spirit, which is, my parents never said no, that I couldn't do anything. I couldn't make art. I couldn't go to dance. I couldn't be in shows, anything like that. But there definitely wasn't necessarily this robust encouragement either. There wasn't really like, oh, this is super exciting. Tell me about that. It's like, oh yeah, go
Mhm.
over there and do what you want.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and there's potential there, and there's also like there's a neutrality there, and there's a benefit to
exactly, exactly.
um. So when did dance get in the picture?
Dan's got in the picture, maybe. Well, okay. I'll talk about this maybe in a couple of different ways. Let's start with the big obvious capital D dance. I think, 15 years old, and a dear friend of mine who I was doing a lot of theater with. I was doing this thing called Odyssey of the Mind, which I hope we get to touch on at some point because that basically is what I'm still doing to this day. We did these, we were just around each other a lot, and she took ballet class and she was in ballet shows. And she said, "Hey, Jimmy, we need boys for this production of Sleeping Beauty." And I was like, absolutely. And it was like this thing that I'd always desired, but was far too scared to sort of push into. So yeah, I was in Sleeping Beauty, third act style during the wedding and during the Polonaise and all of that. And then I just kept on with it. I was like, yeah, I'm doing this. Here we go. Started taking class, and that's how that sort of entered that capital D dance in this way. But going back to childhood and sports and being quite active, my mother put me in gymnastics when I was really, really young, like really,
Mhm.
really young. And I think that was a huge deal for me. And I did a lot of gymnastics too. And up until I was maybe like 13 or so. So I mean, for me, that's dance as
Yeah,
well. And then just also being in a lot of plays and musicals and sort of this performance, that sense of moving my body in this dance way has sort of always been around as well.
yeah. And then when did sewing get in the picture?
Sewing, yeah. My mother used to craft a lot when I was younger. I remember her, yeah, crafts like ladies do in rural West Tennessee in the South, and
Mhm.
painting like little duck figurines or some shit
Yeah,
like that.
or
You
like
know
a
what I
little
mean?
paint by numbers action, or
Fully. And I remember just always being so attracted to it. And when I started doing Odyssey of the Mind, I remember like I was like, no, I want to make the costumes or I want to do this. And um, and I didn't know anything. And I started just asking around and putting, getting a needle and thread and being like, how does this work?
Mhm.
And just sewing two pieces of fabric together. And that sort of blossomed into, yes, sewing, but sort of sewing plus, like the beginning of creature creation for me, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, perfect transition. I was going to talk about your creature creation. I was interested in what you think you can do through a creature or character that gives you more access than what you can do by yourself. What is the
Mm.
purpose of creating something outside yourself like this?
Um, well, I, I don't fully understand it, but I think particularly for dancers or embodied artists, embodied humans in this way, there's something that we don't know, but that we trust that this thing has to happen through the body. Like there's something about the actual physical body that's on this plane that it that it has to be in collaboration with for us to reach towards this thing that we feel.
Hmm.
Um, and so creature creation, uh, I'll, I guess I'll talk about it in this one way, which is like it's my radical reach towards queerness. It's my radical reach towards a formation of myself that I don't even feel right now, but I feel in a future. You know what I mean? Like it's so strange. It is quite time travel-y in this way where like I trust something to manifest momentarily that Jimmy felt when I was 6 years old, or Jimmy felt when I was 12, or yeah, sorry, that got a little loopy there,
It,
but
it makes me think of like a type of futurity or
mm,
a type of humanism that goes, especially if we talk about like cyborg humanism, like where does
mhm,
the body stop, and is that necessarily where the self stops? So you have,
mm,
I guess, like your flesh and blood, but does that necessarily dictate the end of what defines you? Um, so I'm thinking like you're talking about creating these manifestations of consciousness that exist outside your persons, but is still doing some work as you, even if
mhm,
you're um, um, fully in control of what that character expresses or not. I think
mhm.
it sounds like what you're talking about, almost like, and then it could take a life of its own too after that point. So I'm curious uh, how those worlds kind of
Yeah.
intersect.
Um, sorry, I'm just you just lit me up like 14 million different ways with just that last little bit. So one of those last words that you use is something that like I'm so fascinated by, and maybe not in a good way, which is control. Like this idea and this word of control is it's not I know that it's beyond a binary. I know that I do have, say, power or control over something, yet we know that we don't in this same way. I mean, particularly with a lot of my work in recovery and sobriety, control, that word control is in the room a lot.
Hmm.
So I think I'm trying to particularly with creature creation, I'm trying to move beyond these ideas of obvious control. I think I want to be once again in collaboration with something else, with someone else, with other things. Dot dot dot. Um, yeah, control is interesting, and when you were asking about does the self stop, or what is sort of the maybe I'll add to what you were saying by saying like edges, maybe
Hmm.
edges of
Okay.
self,
Yeah.
and and I'm really interested in some of this theory and some of these ideas that people like Aaron Manning put forward, which is um, that maybe we're constantly bodies yet to be. That when I only come to fruition and become momentarily what I am in this world, because I'm sitting here on a Zoom call with you. You know, we manifest because we're near each other. And I tried to reach at this a little bit with some research work that I did last year. And you read this nugget, I think. So I think you can absolutely speak to this as well, which there was that whole section that I was talking about. DJ Dinah Joe is this dog that I live with, that I've been
Mhm.
living with for the past 7 years. And I talk
Infamous.
about this. Would you say?
The infamous.
The infamous,
Yeah.
the sister.
Yeah.
This walk that I take her on in the park after a rainfall, and I talk about each step sort of contouring, each step that I take, each step that DJ takes sort of contours the earth, and it sort of leaves this little hug that reaches back towards the foot that just left. So in a way, my footfall is creating this indentation in the ground, yet my foot remembers the step that I take, and the contour in the ground remembers my foot. So there's this constant sort of manifesting that's happening as we continue to move around and be with each other.
Yeah. And I think that's really, I'm thinking about your writing too. And that's the most effective when you have an image like this and then allow yourself to interpret inside of it, is again where your strength lies. So that image of you walking DJ, I do remember that very vividly. So
Yeah.
it's pretty powerful. I'm also thinking about for myself when you're talking about control, I think about writing being maybe the most you have the reins the most in writing because
Mm,
I'm sitting down by myself, putting the words on the page exactly how I want it, and I know that you will receive it the exact same way every time.
mm.
And I was like,
It don't work like that.
versus like a body in space
Mm,
changes like minute by it's a temporal.
yeah.
uh,
Well, and Nicholas, you know, we've talked at length about this, and this is why I hold one of the many reasons why I hold you in such high regard is because you are doing poetry is sort of this. I think poetry is such a radical form, and I know you say writing, but I really do want to reach towards your specificity in the form of poetry because I think that's the hard work that poetry does is that it's different than prose or narrative or storytelling where storytelling does really try to do what you were saying, which is I put it on paper, it's always going to be this way and it's going to tell you this one thing.
mm,
And poetry, which language tries to do constantly, language tries to control and fix and sort of set in place, which I think poetry is trying to be really radical by coming back to language and text in words and say no, 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 actually poetry wants to open these up to the beyondness, something that the
mhm.
body and dance and performance really tries to do. Yeah, I'm always in such awe when I read your poetry and I read other poetry that confuses me. When I sit
Yeah.
in confusion with poetry, I'm like, oh, I am in communion with the thing, maybe.
Yeah, like meaning is troubled. That feels really
There we go, John Lewis. Okay. Um, it's the good trouble, you know. It's like,
that good trouble,
yeah,
girl.
yeah.
I guess the next question I was going to ask is about your choice to go to school again.
Mm.
So thinking about now that you're on this artist track, what does the professionalization of it look like? Why make that choice? I
You are pushing all the buttons. I know you and you know me, so
like,
that's
good morning.
you.
Hi.
You knew you were coming with the I'm coming with fire. Okay, so yeah, school is so interesting. It's all a bunch of learning, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
But I really pushed against academia for a really long time, which I still do. I think,
Mhm.
especially people that are academics or work in scholarly forms. I think that's the funny thing is that that sometimes we get into these buildings or these structures of like academia or institution or higher ed, and we stop doing the thing that it's for. Like academia is for us to question and push constantly, but sometimes there becomes this sedentary, this yeah, where sorry. So now I sorry, I'm going to go back now and say that I never thought it was for me. I never thought it was needed. And frankly, I just never thought I was smart enough or good enough.
Mhm.
If we really want to talk to like 9 year old Jimmy for a second, is
Mhm.
that like I thought school, I never did particularly well in school. I just sort of did what was needed and rolled on. I was like, my world, the world that I live in is beyond Milan High School or Milan Middle School, elementary school. And so my a dear friend of ours, Sean Wynn Hilton, did an MFA program quite a few years ago now, but and I'm in awe of Sean at all times, but Sean really helped me think through MFA situations because I thought it was sort of one way, but there's different programs out there. So during the pandemic, when we were all sort of sitting down and maybe had some more space, some folks were able to sit down and
Mhm.
have some space. I wanted I wanted something else, I guess. I wanted a different version, and so Sean was really useful and beneficial in helping me think through this program that was originally began by Donna Faye Birchfield at Hollins University back in I couldn't maybe early 2000s,
Mhm.
and then she ended up moving over to University of the Arts, and it's a low residency MFA. And I remember talking to Dee Faye on the phone before I put my application in and just sort of, chatting her up about it. And she was so generous with um, talking through the program. And she made the comment, she said, "Well, Jimmy, we really don't know what this is until we all get there." And that sold me. I
And
was like, this is the space for me. I was like, if the director of this program is going to answer my questions or respond to me with like basically a big fat what else? Yes,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
here we go. Yeah, let's go.
Yeah, it needed to feel like open enough and fluid enough and um, acknowledging who's in the room.
Exactly that part right there.
Mhm.
Who's in the room, who's not in the room, like I think that's the beauty of the U Arts program in particular. And another person that's sort of shepherding this program in a massive way is Tommy DeFrance, who I'm in awe of at every moment I'm in Tommy's presence. And those were sort of always um the bedrock or sort of a foundation of of the types of conversations and work we were at UArts.
Yeah, well, that's great. It
That's great.
is
Admit it is great. I think it's great.
great.
Thank you.
No, because I'm really glad you found that, and I'm in a PhD program, and something about it doesn't have to feel like uh, what you imagine it felt like from the outside. You really should have.
Hmm.
We talk about it all the time, like how can you make the program or the environment you're in work for you?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
it's like you heard that at the beginning, so that's how you knew you had access to that. I'm here constantly thinking of how can I crack open a little bit more to
Hmm.
allow myself to do what I want to do. Uh,
Hmm.
how can I let the challenges also push me in a direction uh, that I didn't know I needed to explore? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of difficult work. I think particularly at we're our generations intersect in a big way. You're a bit younger than me, but I would say at the ages that we're around, we're really in this space of being like, no, 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 like I really have feelings of something I want to say, and to sort of go into a program that sometimes narrows you, you sort of get pushed through this sort of small aperture. And those are rough moments. I would say that I've had, and I would
Yeah, I
probably
think so.
and so I once again, what the MFA at UArts really helped me with is wander around those narrow apertures and sort of those narrow spaces that we get pushed through. It's like there's that old adage of the only way out is through. And
Yeah.
Tommy, at some point, Tommy made this comment. He sort of pushed against that idea. He was like, maybe not. Actually, he was like, Tommy was like, there's a million and four different ways. There's an infinite ways around or through or with something. And so I really in a lot of circumstances push back against this, like, oh, I have to do this. It's like,
Yeah.
well, yes, maybe I have to do this, but in what way do I want to do this in? Is
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and it could look the same all on paper, but that internal how to
Hmm.
deal with it could make a world of difference.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
so don't take you don't have to think too hard about this one. It sounds like it's leading, but I promise it's not. Okay.
Oh gosh.
So if you could change one thing, or like what would you want to see change in the art community? Like what's one thing that you would want to change?
Hmm.
Or if you
Oh,
if you like
yeah.
have a megaphone and could tell the whole community one thing.
Ooh, Nicholas.
And I could narrow it for you a little bit. Let's say you're talking to all artists.
all artists, talking to all artists. Fucking be with each other, like let's be with each other. I'm really fortunate to be in a lot of processes right now. I'm in sort of three different artistic sort of processes, and they're all very, very different processes. And one of them is, yeah, if we're going to talk about change, I'm going to talk about the opera. I'm contracted to be in an opera right now with Atlanta Opera, and I haven't been in a capital R room like that in a long time, since I was doing ballet dancing. And it's so wild how a space that has the label art on it could be so violently hierarchical.
Mhm.
It's really wild, and so I move in that space, and I guess what I'd love to change is say, hey, this isn't art. What's happening in this room? It's not art for me.
Yeah.
And I know it is for some, and I work hard to create space for that. Um, but I just want to say that also not all spaces are for all people. I think we know that. Yeah, I
But
would
I
say just
yeah,
when with.
you specifically too, like you're talking about just being with each other. And I think you show up to everyone's show, you show up to people's
Mm,
cookouts, you show up to people's like when they get together and sew, you're at all these things. So there's a level of being with each other uh even before you start air quotes making that
mhm,
needs to
mhm,
happen to really make the art that you want to make. So that makes
mm.
complete sense. And a place like the opera where you show up, churn it out, and then go
Mhm,
home uh
mhm,
doesn't um doesn't resonate as well anymore.
mhm.
So yeah, that's good advice.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it makes complete sense with how you move through the world. So
Yeah, yeah, I don't and two, I think as as queer people, we're probably thinking around shame a lot. And so even when I think about myself, I'm like, oh, I've signed this contract. I'm in this room. like, do I bounce out of this? Because this is clearly not for me. And so I think about that statement, this is not for me. And instead of like removing myself, I think, well, I'm here in this moment. Like maybe what else about this moment is for me? And so I try to move away from the idea of shaming myself for getting myself into this situation. And I think more about how I can like morph or creature create in a
Hmm.
way that supports me in that room.
Yeah. That kind of all the things we said. So you're like, you're seeing what you don't want. And then
Yeah.
instead of moving straight through it, you're like, I'm going to make an adjustment to how I interpret this and apply that. So yeah. And the last, you talked about queerness. The last question, it's on the paper. It's just naturally how it progressed. It's
It's
not,
on the card.
it's on the card. It says, what would
Okay.
you want to see for the queer community?
Um you know, hmm. Ooh, I'm gonna say it. People staying alive.
Mm,
People staying alive. That's what I want to see in the queer community. I want to see um Laith a couple of years ago, shout out Laith, did was working on a project and she asked me, we did an interview and she asked me, she was like, what would you change about your body, or what do you not like about your, as a
mhm.
speaking of sort of through and with the idea of queerness. And it's so funny, I was like, nothing, you know what I mean, like this is my body, this is my work. um and she goes, that's so funny, she was like, everybody I've interviewed has said something like that. And
Word.
so speaking about like what I'd like to see or what I hope for the queer community, it's like queer is always going to be there as something to reach toward, and it's always going to be on the periphery, it's always going to be on this edge. So to say that, oh, I want to see like queerness sort of be in the center and be highlighted and be this thing that's safe, and it's like, well, it's not. There's never going to be safety in queerness, I think. But what I would like to see is queer folks live their lives, you
Yeah,
know, um, live their lives. That's what I want to see.
I love that. And again, well, we'll talk about it at another time, but your work is really reflecting these
Mm-hmm.
principles. So
Yeah.
it's great that the things you would say is also the things that you're practicing.
Nicholas Goodley, honey, if this interview had to be wrapped up into one statement, I think that's what I hope for art makers. Let me go back for a second. That's what I hope for, say, art community or artists or art makers, is that we might that I hope that we might live the working on a little bit deeper, or that we the things that we're showing, the things that we're performing, the things that we're presenting are the things that we wake up with and live.
Mhm. Agreed. Yeah. Well, that's very beautiful. So
Thank
I
you.
hope people are listening. If not, I'm listening, and I think that was very helpful.
Ow,
Yeah, you.
spirit, spirit.